My name is Jeremy Stockwell. I'm the Client Technology Lead with Microsoft. I'm based in New Orleans and serve enterprise customers located in our South region. And today, I want to talk through that a lot of things are changing, right? Customers' environments are evolving. I mean, if you look at the way things have grown in complexity, especially with the pandemic and having to switch to more online, and that's not just for collaboration. We can talk about Teams and Zoom and email and everything else, but think about retailers and having to reinvent how their online presence works. Their, buy online, pick up in store, integrating with deliveries, UPS, FedEx. There's a lot of different things that customers had to do in order to make sure they could operate in this new reality. And so, we have applications running across a diverse set of infrastructure, running diverse sets of code, .NET, JavaScript, all the entire stack go through that. And even across multiple environments, whether they're private cloud or public cloud. And so that's a lot to manage. That's a lot to make sure you keep track of, that you keep policies consistent throughout your environment. So you're making sure that if I spin up a virtual machine, regardless of where it is, it has my baseline image, Windows, Linux on it, and it is configured so that ports aren't open by default. They're closed by default because security is top of mind for everyone. And you want to make sure that you're doing it consistently across the board to make sure that you are being safe from those malicious actors that seem to be more and more prevalent today. And at Microsoft, we realize that this is something that it's the new reality. While it's accelerated in the past year and a half, 2 years, it's been a reality for a while in how customers and companies want to grow. So with that, what are some of the reasons that you look into it and say, well, why are we going to a hybrid or multi-cloud strategy? There are a few that are listed here. You talk about regulatory and data compliance and sovereignty, right? You think about some of these things. If you're a global company and operate in a country that has data sovereignty, you have to keep that data located within that country. If you have frontline workers or remote sites, you want to make sure that you keep low latency and you put that compute and you put those workloads close to the edge so that they can operate with the workers who are there doing that work and need and depend on those systems. You need to look at, am I an outdated data center? Am I in an outdated application environment? What do I need to do to stay relevant and stay consistent? Not only so I can bring my applications forward and into more recent and relevant frameworks, code bases, etc., but there's not a lot of COBOL programmers that are graduating from college right now looking for work. Things have evolved, and so you want to make sure you can retain even talent for that matter. I've heard a lot of conversations with customers around, we want to start building things where we know we can be attractive so people want to come in and work on our projects, on our applications. And doing things on a green screen aren't necessarily relevant to those people who are now coming up and starting to be the new faces in the workforce and wanting to start leveraging what they have learned, not what was taught 2-3 decades ago. Business continuity resilience, obviously Ron touched on that at the very beginning, where we are looking at how do we make sure that your systems are built to be resilient and withstand even a small downtime, and do it, to the presentation before this, in a way that's consistent with being economical, that you're not deploying a whole new data center and sinking that capital investment on the same like-for-like server infrastructure that you have in your primary. There are ways to do that in a more economical way and offering customers a way to build in that resilience without sacrificing or risking additional downtime or time to restore. And then, we understand. I talk to customers all the time. While I would love customers to use Azure exclusively, I understand we are not the only game in town, and there's preference across organizations, even within organizations, that coming from backgrounds and other places prefer to use one cloud provider or multiple cloud providers. And how do you do that and maintain that management across of those different cloud providers, again, public and private? And so, looking at some statistics that we have from Gartner surveys, 90% of enterprises today depend on a hybrid environment. whether that's even hybrid to the point of using a platform as a service or software as a service like Microsoft 365. And then, we know that even more than that, 93% have a multi-cloud strategy. So they're not just looking at their own data center or even a single public cloud provider to give them what they need to help their businesses run and to help move them forward in their own digital transformation journeys. So with that, I want to talk about our solution through Microsoft, and there are others out there from the other cloud providers, but our solution to help enable organizations to do this, have that hybrid multi-cloud strategy, but maintain that governance, maintain that operational management across all of your resources, regardless of where they are, and that's through Azure Arc. Basically, it's the ability to bring visibility, operations, and compliance to your infrastructure and services, regardless of where they are. They can be in Azure, they can be in on-prem, they can be in AWS, they can be running in VMware, either on-prem or even now in our VMware service, or in GCP or AWS. It's enabled through Azure Arc to make sure that you can govern, secure, and organize all of those resources in a single place. Enabling Azure Arc allows you to bring your existing infrastructure so you can take advantages of doing things like scalability, fast deployment, because now you're managing from a single place and know I can deploy to the cloud or deploy to on-prem depending on those needs, depending on those items that I touched on earlier, and those 5 things of why you would put something either in a region or in a data center or in a cloud somewhere else. And then you can build with consistency. You can even extend to the edge, right? Azure Arc works with Azure IoT, works with Azure Stack, which I will get to in a few slides, and talk about how you can not only leverage within the data centers, but those services that are out there in the field. Think about a downstream oil and gas customer. A downstream oil and gas customer that has rigs on platforms, whether they're land-based or somewhere out at sea. They've got infrastructure out there. How do you manage that? What's a way to do it from a central place? And you can do that through Azure Arc. It's something that we've announced a couple of years ago. It's come a long way, and going from here forward in the next slide, let's dive into this before I start talking through the security pieces of hybrid and multi-cloud strategy. So again, this unified operations, cloud-native services through things like AKS, Azure SQL, PaaS services, modernizing data estates, and then basically just modernizing your data center, whether that's moving to cloud or going through the idea of putting in cloud-native hardware such as Azure Stack into your environment, either in the data center or at the edge. So I'm going to step through each of these things and talk about what this means to adopt a successful hybrid strategy, migrating to Azure, unifying operations with Arc, building cloud-native services, modernizing your state, modernizing your data center. So when you think about unified operations, ArcEnabled servers, we support Windows, we support a wide range of Linux distros that include SUSE and Red Hat. ArcEnabled SQL Server is, I think, is now out of public preview. It should be in general availability. But you can take advantage of things like management and security services to monitor and update and keep those solutions and those assets consistently patched, consistently monitored throughout your environment using Azure Arc. You can even go into Azure ArcEnabled Kubernetes, which I'll touch on in a few minutes. We've got a couple of blurbs here from organizations that have adopted Arc. You've got Avanade, Mike DeLuca, their global lead for hybrid. Ferguson, Massey Ferguson, they're just from database administration, that talks about how Arc has enabled them to really embrace this hybrid and multi-cloud strategy in the way that they need to satisfy their customers and their business. Cloud-native apps, anywhere and at scale. This is probably, I think, the single biggest thing that I've seen recently. Before it was, we're just going to lift and shift and move as is. A lot of customers have evolved over time, and they want to build modern applications. Whether that's they want to refactor and put onto a PaaS service such as Azure App Services, or they want to do it in containers, right? Well, Azure Arc specifically, when it talks about Arc-enabled Kubernetes clusters, we can leverage Arc to manage, monitor, and govern even at that level of the container level within Azure. We want to make sure, regardless of where you're putting your applications, that you have the insight and the visibility across the board to make sure that you're using the best tools, familiar tools, practices, and that it's being built as cloud native and being built modern. So similar to ArcEnabled servers, when we talk about Kubernetes, it's a wide range of distributions similar to Linux. You can connect these clusters to Azure. You can start deploying applications to these clusters using GitOps based models. You can enable cluster health in Azure Monitor using through Azure Arc. And then another powerful capability is policy. Azure Policy is something that can be enabled throughout Azure ArcEnabled services to say, going back to I'm not opening these ports. I'm not going to enable the SA admin account on a SQL server. I'm not going to do some of these things because you want to make sure that you're being not only compliant and secure across the board, and being able to apply those policies at scale across all of your resources is something that Arc brings to the table, including within Kubernetes clusters. Again, a couple of other quotes here from some of our customers at Siemens and Fujitsu talking about how enabling Arc in their Kubernetes clusters has allowed them to build a more cloud-native application portfolio and deliver better capabilities and better functionality to not only their end users within the organizations, but their customers at scale. The next one is being able to run Azure services anywhere when it comes to even Kubernetes. Arc-enabled machine learning, Arc-enabled data services. I've specifically had customers really interested in deploying the Arc-enabled data services because, again, it allows that single management and allows the single policy, the single security from anywhere across on-prem, private cloud, public cloud, across your hybrid cloud environment. So with Azure native services, you can innovate using the latest services in Azure. You can operate efficiently using cloud native tools. You can manage and secure using Azure security services, which I'll touch on a little bit later. But if you look at this, machine learning, think about that. How much is it going to be to do machine learning models on-prem? And is it better left from an economical standpoint, thinking about the previous presentation? Does it make more economical sense to do that in the cloud? And so with Arc-enabled machine learning, you can leverage existing infrastructure or even expand that to our cloud services to run machine learning, to build machine learning models, and to make sure that you're bringing those capabilities to make smart and intelligent decisions regardless of the industry that you're in. Data scientists can innovate with machine learning tools that are familiar to Azure regardless of where they live. It's a single pane of glass. It's familiar tools. You're using the Azure portal. You're using the Azure Data Studio and Azure CLI command line interface to really think through and work from a single environment as opposed to jumping between different places to get your job done. Another piece of this is, modernizing your data estate, which is the fourth item that I brought up before. Looking at SQL managed instance, one of our PaaS services, PaaS data services, Azure Database for Postgres. I have a number of customers that have really looked at that as a way to move off of other database platforms and really simplify not only their management but also the licensing and save them money from other databases, even some of our own. I'll say that too. Some of it will require refactoring on the application end, but with Azure Arc, across on-premise data centers, third-party cloud, Kubernetes, hardware of your choice, you can bring these services, these data services, to your organizations to maintain on-prem in the cloud, but build a modern data estate. Right? You want to make sure that you're working with things like Synapse, be able to work with things like Synapse, with some of our high-performance compute. Again, things that may be cost prohibitive or just prohibitive in general from deploying to on-prem, but leveraging Arc to connect data regardless of where it is with those services in Azure to make sure that you're able to take advantage of them in a simplified way. we bring the cloud elasticity on-prem. You can optimize performance of your data workloads, dynamically scale up and down, dynamically scale out without downtime to applications, because you're having to scale the back-end database to meet the load that it's under from whatever is coming from the application or applications connected to it. Again, unified management, I think, is the biggest key here. It's a single pane of glass. You're seeing all of your data services, regardless of where they're running, using those familiar tools, and leveraging our security and governance capabilities, Azure Security Center, Azure Policy, role-based access control through Azure Active Directory to protect your data, regardless of where it is, and even bring modern cloud billing model through Azure Arc for those enabled data services to make sure that you are understanding the cost across the board and you're not letting it get out of control, and use things like Azure Cost Management, cost allocation rules, and other services that we are bringing forward within the Azure space to help you manage your cloud spend and manage it holistically across the board. Again, same quote or new quote from Ferguson about how we have helped them enable through the ArcEnabled data services the ability for them to leverage and manage and modernize their data estate using Azure Arc. And the next one I'll talk through is Azure Stack. Now, this is this is where we get into a hardware conversation, and this is where we have to rely on our partners like Dell, Lenovo, Cisco. They are the ones who are enabling this, but we are bringing the power of the cloud down to hardware that you can deploy in your environment, right? Before this was there, you only had the ability to log in and access via the portal, none of it running in your own data center. But now, Azure Stack HCI, it's designed to help you modernize traditional infrastructure, brings those services from the Azure cloud into your data center, virtualized servers, storage, hyperconverged infrastructure, and it's all integrated with the Azure Cloud Fabric through Azure Arc. Gives you a single place to manage all of it, see where the VMs are running, regardless if it's HCI in one of your data centers on-prem or some other location. Stack Edge is also a smaller version of that, but really designed to be out in the field. Think about, I've got customers, again, going back to oil and gas, I've actually have mining customers now where they have equipment, they have IoT sensors that need real-time processing of that data in the field, and they can't, either because they're in an area with low network connectivity, high latency, or just the fact that they need the data there and they don't have time for it to go back to a data center, be calculated and put on a dashboard to then be represented to them, which may be a long way away from a latency perspective when you talk about round trip. Azure Stack Edge gives you the ability to bring IoT hub, compute, AI, analytics, those services, so you can do that without having to make that round trip even to the public clouds, the Azure cloud, and do those real-time analytics on site, connect those things on site. Ultimately, you can backhaul that data to wherever you need it to go, but when you need that really critical information to be compiled and computed on site, bringing the Azure services down to Stack Edge, forward operating in the field, gives you the ability to do just that. And finally, Stack Hub. This is really in complete sorry, getting a little feedback. Am I right now? All right, maybe it's just me.
Let me just, I wonder, okay, let me, all right, Jeremy, keep going. I think I've got that clarified. Okay, sorry for that background noise.
No, that's okay. It was just an echo. I want to make sure it wasn't my device and had to switch. So lastly, Stack Hub. This is where you're truly in a disconnected environment where it brings integrated services from the Azure cloud, consistent with what you would have in connected environments in your data center, to the edge, to the forward site, so that you can, again, do those tasks that you need to using services and deploying services to that environment in the same, using the same tools that you have to deploy it across your environment. We've Stack Hub is something, think about putting it in, vehicles that have to drive around and other places where typically they would operate in a disconnected mode, may connect to backhaul data, but then, go back disconnected, but still have the services available to take data in, to do analysis on it, to do some visualization, what you need to do on the field, and then when it does become connected, backhaul that in. So that's really it from a hybrid multi-cloud approach for Microsoft. There's a lot more information out there, call to action towards the end, but I want to now dive into the security piece of a hybrid and multi-cloud architecture, and that's really where Azure Security Center comes into play. So you think Security Center is a way that you can strengthen your hybrid cloud posture. We offer things like Secure Score, where those connected environments we can run analysis on to say, hey, here are some things that are open that need to be addressed to be compliant with this NIST standard, or if you have, say you're in healthcare and you need these standards applied to your environment, this HIPAA standard because you don't have encryption turned on these disks. Policies and compliance allow you to be able to do that through our compliance score, and the automation too through Security Center to be able to say, well, if we see something, to be able to go ahead and say, all right, we don't even need to think about that, just go ahead and automate and take that action to ensure we are now compliant and make sure that that action gets done. Have the ability to do that through Security Center, plus some things like Azure Automation and Logic Apps. Specifically, though, through Arc, you have the ability to extend Azure Defender for servers, cloud-native workloads, database servers, data-connected services, even IoT devices, where we can go in and monitor and alert on things like suspicious login activity, password spray, other things and signs and signals that are hitting those services to alert someone, or again, automated action to see that, hey, I've got a compromised or potential compromised asset here. I need to go take care of it. Defender through Arc can do that regardless of, for those services that are supported, can do that regardless of where that service is located. And if you think about it, it can be something in Google, AWS, on-prem, Azure, it doesn't matter. We have the ability through Security Center to do that. The automation through Logic Apps, being able to integrate it with a SIEM tool, our cloud native SIEM, which is Azure Sentinel, shown in the next couple of slides, being able to export that data if we need to for more investigation or forensics after an issue or after an attack. Want to make sure that we are giving through not only Security Center, but those enabled services in Arc, a way for it to touch your entire environment and not have to go look at multiple windows and leverage multiple tools to manage each of those different environments. Again, mention Azure Sentinel. These tie into things that you have not only on the Azure side with Azure Defender through SQL VMs, containers, network traffic, but also on our Microsoft 365 side. A lot as you think about, what about a lot of the attack vectors today are on the identity side. That is probably the single biggest attack vector now, with things being moved and shifted to a solution-based service like an M365 or others. Identities are the way, through phishing attacks, malicious links, other ways that bad actors are getting user information and getting into those systems and getting access to data, not necessarily taking over services, but getting access to the sensitive data of your organization. And that's where the full Microsoft Defender suite, which includes both 365 Defender and Azure Defender, aggregated up through Azure Sentinel, will provide you that visibility so that you can intelligently take action when you need to, or even go further than that, build playbooks and build threat hunting investigations that automatically take over through Logic Apps and other resources to go shut something down, disable an account or enforce MFA through our Azure Identity Protection, so that if it seems like you're going through or being attacked, that you shut that down before an actor gets in. I keep hearing that, typically companies and organizations don't realize that someone's been in their environment until after at least 3 months. Well, this is a way to be proactive, not go hunt what's already there, but keep those out. Defender for servers. And again, this also brings in kind of our Microsoft Defender for endpoint. You think about Defender on workstations running on Windows. Well, we also offer that on the server side for both Windows and Linux servers. Extending that through Azure Arc to get things like behavioral analytics, lateral movements, also leveraging the Defender for endpoint and Azure Defender for server for application allow lists. There's a lot, I don't know if anyone on the call is in the oil and gas industry or have been affected by the latest TSA mandates, but that's one of the biggest things I've heard customers looking to implement because they want to make sure that there is only a single allow list across their environment, whether it's workstation or servers, that are going to be run at any given time and allowed to run. And so being able to globally set that through Defender, through Azure Defender, through ArcEnabled services, is a way to manage that from a single location and not have to do it from multiple management points. Defender for SQL gives us the advanced threat protection, gives us vulnerability assessment, but it gets down to the SQL level. We're not just talking about the server level. We're talking about even at the SQL level to look about harmful attacks to breach the SQL server piece, not just Windows or Linux server. Looking at how are my security configurations built within SQL Server, and are there any ways to discover things that there may be a vulnerability in SQL Server across a hybrid data estate, across a modern data estate. Defender provides you that. It's no longer just a reporting. It's I want to be able to assess, manage, and proactively mitigate any attempted threats or close those doors before any bad actor realizes that they're open. Defender for storage. Native Azure, it's secured natively within Azure using Azure Defender, right? So if you have storage accounts where you're moving up your file servers, network file shares, and you want to make sure that those are protected from a single place, because you're no longer surfacing them through a server. It's now just a service. It's not just an IaaS service with a storage account. We have the way to even extend Azure Defender for blob containers, file shares, data lakes. Think of data lakes and all the organizations that are moving their modern data estates, building out their data lakes, putting sensitive data and company data in there, operational data in there. The Azure Defender is connected natively to all of those things. It's centralized and, again, integrated with those other tools, Defender for identity, Defender for M365, Defender for servers and endpoints, so that you can see, is this an isolated attack, or is this kind of they're trying to go throughout my environment and see where the vulnerabilities are, so I understand I have not just an issue with my storage, but an issue in these other places as well. Defender for Kubernetes. Talked earlier about how Azure Arc enables you to build and modernize natively with cloud services in Azure Arc-enabled AKS. Well, Azure Defender extends to Kubernetes as well. Provides audits against AKS clusters, hardens them, benchmarks them against the Docker CIS benchmark and on container nodes, runs real-time threat detection, surfaces those anomalies and surfaces those signals when they need to be through something like Azure Monitor, Sentinel, where they can be correlated with other signals, and admission control, policy management. Who has actually access to the Kubernetes clusters can deploy to them through Git operations, and make sure that only those people who have access to the underlying service fabric get access just in time when they need to, and that it's audited, and that security best practices are being taken, managing and deploying across an AKS cluster. So in closing, again, a lot of it is enabled hybrid multi-cloud through Arc, modernizing services, whether they're virtual machines, data services, whether it's modernizing through something like Azure Stack, whether it's protecting your hybrid resources. We have, through Arc and Defender, we have the tools and the capabilities to be able to do that across your entire environment, wherever it's located. And if you'd like to learn more, you just go to azure.com/hybrid. And with that, I think I'm done. So thank you, Ron. I don't know if there's any questions or if you'd like to ask any yourself.